in the main, this main room. So today we wanted to talk to you about San Francisco's housing plan. This is a plan that gets updated every few years, and this update is different than others in the past in that we are having a strong focus on racial equity and advancing racial equity. The previous elements and housing plans kind of, while they talk about affordability and equity, they don't kind of elevate the focus on racial equity, and that's something that we wanted to focus on and elevate in the next housing plan. And the update will be, it's a 2-year process and will be completed in 2022. So in the next year or two, we are going to have multiple conversations. And as we have our mandate to advance racial equity in the future of our city, we know that we won't be able to come up with the right solutions unless we are, those solutions are coming up by people who have been experiencing historic discrimination for decades. And those are our Black communities, American Indians, Latinos, Chinese, Asian populations, and the list goes on. So I'm going to have my colleague, Zachary McRae, to go through the presentation and kind of share a bit about what the project is and what are some of the ideas that we are exploring so far. And we'll spend most of our time today kind of hearing your ideas and your thoughts and needs in terms of housing issues. Zach?
Awesome. Thank you, Kimia. Good afternoon. Well, I guess 1 minute till good afternoon. It's good to be here. I hope everyone is well and in good health. And I'm excited to kind of go over the housing element with you today. So if Kimia, would you move to the next slide? And before we do that, just want to do this land recognition that we're currently occupying Ramaytush Ohlone land. And in addition to just acknowledging the land that we're on, also, again, as Kimia mentioned, our goal around advancing racial and social equity, really using this as an opportunity to address, the legacy of land theft, genocide that American Indians and Native people have experienced in the United States. And so we have a short video to explain, a little bit of an explainer. So if you could please play that, that'd be great.
Housing in San Francisco continues to be one of our greatest challenges. It's rooted in troubled policies that contribute to the inequities of our society. While San Franciscans have come up with a number of solutions in the past few years, we need a cohesive plan to address this complex challenge. The city is launching the Housing Element Update, a series of policies that collectively address the housing needs of all, especially seniors, communities of color, and low and middle income families. It will shape the future of housing in San Francisco, prioritizing values we've heard. Represent your values. Visit our website to help create equitable housing policies for our city.
All right, thank you, Kimia. And so we're just to start off of what is the housing element. And in its most basic sense, it's our collective vision of how we want to plan for housing and the future of housing development patterns in San Francisco. It also includes policies, and it tracks implementation of certain housing related programs to achieve its goal. And as Kimia mentioned, it's updated every 8 years. So the last one was done in 2014, and this next one will be done in 2022. Next slide. So how it's used, there's you can think of it in these two main buckets, so to speak. So it's a document that is legally mandated, and it's meant to meet state mandates to maintain our eligibility for funding for affordable housing. And as a city, San Francisco is also required to plan for a certain number of units at different ranges of household incomes. So from very low, low, moderate, but above moderate, et cetera, et cetera. And then going down to this second bucket, as I mentioned before, it really represents the values that our communities hold for the future of the city, and it defines our priorities for housing solutions, and it helps decision makers, elected officials and other city administrators guide their decisions and allocation of resources. And one other thing I'll mention is that previous housing elements have not been explicitly binding documents. A lot of cities have just kind of put something out there and then just never looked back. But at this time, we really want to create something that binds us to what we want to focus on and creates a mechanism for accountability. Next slide. And so, given kind of that brief explanation of what it is and how it's used, we're also working in this backdrops around the fight for liberation of various communities of color and this Black Lives Matter movement. And that's really guiding our goal around racial and social equity for this particular document. And earlier in the summer, the Planning Commission passed a resolution, one, just acknowledging and apologizing for its role in discriminatory practices and institutional racism as a government agency, and in really its active role in relegating marginalized communities to like the fringes. And it also called for this proactive approach to redressing that historical harm. And these are and as I mentioned before, this is one process where we feel that we can really put what was passed in this resolution into action. Next slide. And in addition to this moment of social kind of struggles, we also are in the middle of a public health crisis with the COVID-19 pandemic. And as this is a bit dated, but the trends are still similar. As you can see, the rate of positive cases for COVID-19 fall in line with the communities that have historically been shut out from opportunity based on public programs. So it's not a coincidence, and it really illustrates the discriminatory policies and the effects it's had. Next slide. So out of the 2014 housing element, there were a few things that kind of came about of that. And what you see on the left hand is just a few of the policies that were prescribed from that document. And just to highlight a few things, one, it talked about mitigating the impact of short-term rentals or Airbnb properties or units. And since then, the city has reduced that by about 5,000 units. And those units usually typically they take units off the market, and therefore it contributes to the housing crisis. Another one I'll highlight is this increase in accessory dwelling units as a form of creating more affordable housing. You know them as you might know them as in-law units. And since the 2014 housing element, the city has either built or approved 2,200 ADUs, accessory dwelling units. And then also the 2014 housing element also had this focus on homelessness, which we've seen is such a prevalent issue for the city, and something that we really want to put more attention to as we move forward. Next slide. And then here are some things that didn't really change, or kind of were just laissez-faire and in some ways contributed to the housing affordability crisis we're in. And I think one of the things that I'll highlight for this slide is that some of the things that were relevant in 2014 aren't necessarily, that's not the case anymore. And there's this difference between community planning and community-led planning, and how that this term neighborhood character can mean different things to different peoples. And so as it was presented as a way to, you know, increase affordable habitability, but like this notion of preserving neighborhood character, but that's actually had, in some cases, some exclusionary effects. And we want all areas of the city to be accessible to all SF residents. And then again, just this, the single family home as an affordable housing strategy has just not been, has not kind of come to fruition. And so it's time for us to really rethink about the approaches and strategies we want to take to creating and preserving housing affordability. And then, as Kimia mentioned, again, our previous elements and plans were just neutral on racial equity, and this is something that we really want to highlight moving forward. Next slide. So here we just want to present to you the values that we are coming with to this next update, and these are values that we've gathered from previous outreach efforts and engagement efforts. And so we just didn't just come up with these. These were things that we've heard, and we really wanted to galvanize around these values and start to create our policy ideas from these values. And these are just kind of starting points for our discussions, and we want to make sure that we are really listening to you know, all the communities that comprise of San Francisco, and you know, we're hoping that through these values we can really start those conversations and have, you know, fruitful outcomes. Next slide. And then really just, again, hammering the fact that we want racial equity to permeate through all phases of this process, through the outreach and engagement, from our data analysis and findings, and for establishing metrics and implementing programs. That is this is just something that's first and foremost for us, and really just wanted to just highlight that this is kind of our North Star. Next slide. So we, you know, coming and presenting to you all, we want to recognize that the Bayview Hunters Point neighborhood is one of the most diverse neighborhoods in the city. And we also see a higher concentration for Black residents compared to the rest of the city. And so given that, you know, our approach is really centered on racial equity, we want to focus these remedies on Black residents and other residents of color. Because, you know, as you can see, it's 26, the neighborhood breakdown is 26% Black, whereas in the city it's, you know, arguably around 5%. Oh, that's okay. That's good. Thanks, Kimia. And then, so we just also wanted to highlight some of the inequities where we see, you know, differences in household median income, home ownership rates, and again, using this data to guide our approaches to future strategies around making sure everyone has an opportunity to live and remain in San Francisco. Next slide. And then here, just again, presenting this, although this may be, folks may know this already, but just wanting to show that these are things that we're taking into consideration in terms of homeowner cost burden and renter cost burden. As you can see, our Black residents in San Francisco face higher housing burdens than other racial and ethnic groups in the city. And, you know, with the exception of renters, you know, we see that Black and Latino renters tend to have similar cost burdens. And then we really just want to acknowledge this decrease, and a significant decrease in San Francisco's Black population over the last couple of decades. And this is something that we're really hoping to reverse in our next housing element update, because it's had such a dramatic effect in just the city overall. Next slide. And then here we just wanted to demonstrate and show the overrepresentation of people in certain, oh, it looks like it's got a little bit of weird formatting, apologies for that. But just showing the overrepresentation of certain communities in specific kind of identifiers. So whereas, you know, the San Francisco Black population is around 5% of the total population, it's Black people represent 37% of the homeless population and 53% of the incarcerated people in San Francisco's county jail over at the Hall of Justice and 850 Bryant. And then we have some COVID-related data as well, but just to show that there's overrepresentation in all of these. Next slide. And so here is some of the policy ideas or some of the targeted policies that focus on racial equity. As I mentioned, reversing the outmigration and displacement of communities affected, which we've seen has had a significant impact on our Black residents in San Francisco. Investing in programs for stabilizing these communities. This can look like, you know, the preference policies in the lottery, in the citywide lottery for affordable housing. Identify neighborhoods affected by environmental justice and prioritize healthy housing. You know, we can see you know, the treatment plant in Bayview Hunters Point as an environmental justice issue, and so working around those things and strategies to help the neighborhood grow and overcome some of these issues. We have the equitable geographic distribution of growth, which just basically means, and these last two just basically mean, you know, having more housing options in other parts of the city. Is not concentrating all the development in one particular part of the city, but making sure that people have access to all parts. And that is going to be facilitated by, you know, more housing development on the west side and other parts of the city. Next slide. Here, just wanted to touch on the environmental justice framework. So state law is requiring all of the elements, so housing, transportation, public safety, et cetera, to incorporate an environmental justice framework. And so that's something that we'll be doing with this update as well. And the housing element is the first update to incorporate this environmental justice. And so Kimmy mentioned Lisa, and so we'll be working with Lisa and her team to make sure that there's a framework incorporated and it's aligned with some of the other updates coming from San Francisco. Here's just some example policies around environmental justice. And there's still a lot more kind of thinking to be done in terms of how we integrate it into the housing element, but just wanted to present these as examples. And so here is where we're starting from, and some key policy ideas. We talked a bit about that first point around equitable housing and recognizing the historical discrimination that's based on race and class and you know, things that still exist today. We also wanted to think about housing security and protecting vulnerable communities from displacement. Again, you know, I guess one of the kind of mainstream interventions here could be some, you know, rent control and how that stabilizes communities. But thinking about how we can strengthen just protection policies and programs. Preserving affordability, you know, we have the city has a small sites acquisition program, and that's something that we want to, again, expand on with this housing element update. Increasing housing production, including and permanently affordable housing, and doing that in a way that facilitates growth that is where the burden is kind of shared throughout the city. And then promoting sustainable, livable, and resilient neighborhoods, and linking to things like climate change, sea level rise, and making sure that our communities are adaptive and resilient to you know, changes in the climate. So here is some input from when the planning department has worked with the Bayview Hunters Point community in the past. I'm sure, you know, some, if not most, are familiar with some of these challenges, and these are some things that we are going to consider as we move in, well, as we do our public engagement, move into sort of policy drafting, and then as we kind of reach back out additionally and say, here's the things we heard and here's how we're revising, this type of input is super helpful for us as well. So here's what we'll do. I don't know how many people we're at in terms of who's in the meeting, So I don't know if we want to do this in breakout groups or if we just want to do this here. We'll have people taking notes, but here's some of the things we want to discuss. What are some of the existing housing programs that have served your housing needs well, or your immediate community well? And there's some examples of housing programs, and if there's programs there that aren't there as well, feel free to mention those as well. Oh, and then you can go to the next one. And then the other question is kind of just the other side of that coin. What are the housing challenges that have not been served well? And on the right, there's just some examples. But if there are things that you want to bring up, we're definitely all ears. I see we have 12 attendees outside of staff. So I'm curious, Camille or Lizlyn, what do you think would be the best approach if we want to do breakouts, or if we want to just kind of use the space here to talk about these questions?
I would say it's up to you guys. I mean, I would say since the breakout rooms are going to be, 10 to 12 people each anyways, and we have about 12 attendees outside of staff, it looks like, that we just keep it in this room.
Okay, that works. So I'm just going to copy and paste these questions into the chat so you can look at them pretty easily. And sorry, go ahead, Camille.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, so I think that's a great idea. Let's just stay in this group, and so everyone can hear from each other as well. I also want to give a shout out to Michelle Pierce. I think she's also joined us. We've also been working with her as in a housing policy group that we have, working with people who specifically do professional work in like housing advocacy and organizing. So we have a series of meetings with those, some of those representatives, and Michelle's part of that. So I think we're just going to open it up, and maybe we can go around the room and introduce ourselves, or the attendees can introduce themselves and try to get at the questions that we have. We don't have to take them in any order. It's just an informal conversation. So Leslie, do you mind kind of calling on people to introduce themselves, and so we can start the conversation?
Sure. Let me see if I'm able just to go in alphabetical order, because that would make things easier, I think, for most. And I think if we are going in alphabetical order, Danny, you're up first.
Hi, my name is Danny Kim. I'm one of the staff here at Rise University Prep. We're a middle high school in the Bayview. And so what you guys are sharing about kind of our decreasing African-American population here in the Bayview, we definitely see that amongst our students. And we see a lot of them having to spend some time with their grandparents in the city, but then have to go over to Vallejo or East Bay during the weekends to where they live. So it's that dynamic that we're seeing, and what can we do to keep our families in the Bayview, in the city. And so that's really on my heart.
Thank you, Danny. I guess next is Christina with El Centro.
Hi, my name is Christina. I'm with El Centro Bayview. We work primarily with monolingual immigrant Latino families who have who live in the Bayview, basically. And because of gentrification, I would imagine, the mission was one of the first places that Latino immigrants would arrive at and find work and community and housing. But because of the cost of housing over the past 20 years, I guess, then many are, as you know, in planning, going to south of Market, the Tenderloin, and I believe the majority are coming to the Bayview. So there's been an influx of Latinx folks in the Bayview. So we work with families and children. That's primarily what we do.
Thank you, Christina. And next we have Elisa Rodriguez with K2C, I believe. Elisa?
Hi, sorry about that. Apologies, my internet is pretty slow, so I can't use the camera right now. But my name is Elisa Rodriguez Fury, and I work with the kindergarten to college program, which basically is children's savings accounts that the City and County of San Francisco opens for all the students attending the Unified School District schools, starting in kindergarten all the way to 10th grade. We open accounts with $50 for every student. And we are focusing our outreach efforts on Latinx community, African American community, and we are very interested in this conversation because we want to see how, this is affecting our families in the Bayview. Thank you.
Thank you. Grace with Third Street Youth Center and Clinic.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace. I work at Third Street mostly with TAY youth, 18 to 24-year-olds. And I will kind of echo what Danny said. I think one of our main challenges is the majority of our young adults are experiencing housing insecurity, meaning they're like moving around, staying with a grandparent, staying with other family members and friends, and technically often experiencing homelessness. And another challenge, just finding that there's the limited affordable housing, and then some of what's regarded as affordable housing is actually not affordable to the young people and families that we're working with.
Thank you, Grace. Hattie with Hunters Point Family.
Hi, yes, I'm Hattie with Hunters Point Family. We are an after-school program for people of color, but we primarily serve African-American families in the Bayview. We currently have locations on Harbor Road, Oakdale, and we're located in Alice Griffin. Right now, we're on-site providers. Currently, we're a virtual program. This conversation is very important for our agency and for our families because primarily most of our families are African-American, and also because they're impacted by this displacement and gentrification that we're seeing here in the city. And we need to figure out ways that we can help sustain our families and keep them stable in their current housing, and also help create more pathways that's equitable for single family homes to prosper and become homes eventually, because you don't see that process happen as often as it should be for the few families that are here in San Francisco.
Thank you, Hattie. Jesse with Habitat for Humanity.
Hi, I'm Jessie. I'm our client services manager here at Habitat Greater San Francisco. And I have primarily been working with our home repair families, and our repair program is focused in the Bayview neighborhood of San Francisco. And most of our families, around 80%, have been African American, and we're in a strategic planning year, so really trying to get an idea of where the gap is, what we can do, what this program looks like for the next 3 years, and trying to understand what the needs of the community are and matching them with all of the data we've collected since 2012.
Thank you, Jesse. Next we have Lindsay with Open Door Legal. Lindsay with Open Door Legal. Okay, we'll come back to Lindsay. Lydia with Center for Youth Wellness. Miss Lydia.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lydia Vincent White with the Center for Youth Wellness. I'm sorry, I always have to on my video. I am with the Center for Youth Wellness in the Bayview. Born and raised in the Bayview as well. Blessed to be able to work here. The Center for Youth Wellness works with families. Primarily, our primary audience is young people, children and youth, but the families as well who are dealing with trauma-related stress. So adverse childhood experiences, toxic stress, that sort of thing, that's what the agency does. But as a resident of Bayview, We do have some organizations here, like the San Francisco Housing Development Corporation, that is trying to help people, but the insidiousness of the system that kept the redlining going, not just in Bayview Hunters Point, but all over the nation, is a problem. So I'm wondering how the San Francisco planning, this effort, is going to get to the root of the root. And dismantle that. We can't put a Band-Aid on this issue with projects and programming without going back to the fact that there were laws in place that made sure that Black people only could live in certain areas of this country. And when it affected Black people, it also affected Hispanic and other low-income folks. So in order to fix this problem, we have to dismantle that system. And so I'm thinking that as you move forward, there's a video clip, and there's also a book that's called The Color of Law. And the video clip has a really short narrative of what actually happened in America with the laws and policies that were set in place that set up ghettos and all of that. I think that needs to be spoken of every time you come to an issue about housing in America, because there are people who don't believe that the folks who are forced into neighborhoods that are underserved that's not systemic. They believe that that's the victim's fault, right? So I'm gonna stop talking because I can go on and on and on and on and on. But you got to get to the root of the root before you can fix this problem. It's entrenched in American law and in American policy.
Miss Lydia, if you can bring up that clip, I put the name of the book in the chat, but if you can bring up that video clip, if you can add that to the chat, that would be helpful as well. Yeah.
Miss Lynn, if I can't find it before this is over, I'll send it to you and Frank to add to the notes.
Okay.
I have to search for it.
Okay, that'd be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, Maria with Rec and Park. And Maria, I think you joined us before you got the cue, but people are just sharing who they are and if they're representing an organization, but also sharing any housing challenges that are not being served currently in the city, and if you know of any existing housing programs that are serving housing needs well in the city.
Yeah, great, thank you, and I apologize for joining the conversation late. My name is Maria Duran. I work with Rec and Park, but I also manage the San Francisco Children and Nature Collaborative, and my interest in this conversation is just equity and access to open space and nature, and all the great benefits that come from being out in nature and the outdoors.
And did you want to address any of the prompts while you have the...
I don't know if I missed the conversation. I don't know if I have a lot to add right now.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you, and nice to meet you all.
Okay, you as well. And then Miss Mary Louise. I can unmute you, Miss Mary Louise, if that's helpful. Oh, maybe I cannot. It's not allowing me to. If you're able to unmute yourself, Miss Mary Louise, that would be helpful because I have some reason it's not letting me.
You might be able to hold the space button down while you talk.
Okay. Miss Mary Louise, if you're still there, you heard Frank. If you could hold the space bar down, that might be helpful too. Okay, I'm gonna move us along. Michelle with Bayview Advocates.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'll take myself off of no video. I am in the produce market, so if you guys hear truck traffic, I'm very sorry. I am with the Bayview Hunters Point Community Advocates. As was stated earlier by Kimia, I have been part of Planning's Equitable Housing Working Group, and I'm hoping maybe some of you guys can join me. We are doing a lot of anti-displacement and environmental justice work around housing for everybody in Bayview Hunters Point. We are an African-American focused nonprofit, but we do a lot of advocacy on behalf of Latinx, our Asian, Pacific Islander community neighbors, as well as very intense work right now because of COVID on our unhoused neighbors. So this topic is something that is very close to my heart, very critical to my heart, and there's just so much policy that needs to either be undone or put into place to correct for a lot of the not just federal, but historical and contemporary housing policies coming out of planning. And I'm really excited to work with this group. In the planning department, we've hit on a lot of stuff. There's some stuff missing, but you got to take the good as far as you can, and don't let that be the enemy of the don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Because yeah, not only have we been bleeding our Black residents in this city, Bayview has been the catch-all for the gentrification of the Richmond district, so the Chinese community that was there, and the gentrification of the Mission district, so the Latinx and immigrant community. And now we are starting to lose them in the city from Bayview as well. They're moving out further and further. So I would like to keep the diversity of the city here. And I would like to be able to have myself and my kids be able to afford to stay here. So that's it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Michelle. Vernon, walk us up. We still can't hear you, Vernon. Nope, we still can't hear you. You want to try again? No, the mic. Yeah. Okay. Maybe you can add in the chat your thoughts. Okay.
You might also. You might want to.
Your computer might be muted.
No, it wasn't.
You sometimes if you like leave the Zoom meeting and come back, it will fix itself.
Yeah, you can try that. Sorry, Vernon. Oh, no. Okay. Either put in a chat or you can try to come back, Vernon. Sorry. Okay. I'm gonna circle back to see if is Lindsay still here? Or no? Did she get off? Yep, she's off. So I'm gonna see if Mary Louise, are you able to unmute yourself, Miss Mary Louise? Okay, still having trouble. All right, well, I want to also open the floor up if any of the BMAGIC staff want to add anything, because they are also residents of San Francisco, both Frank and Maura. So if you guys wanted to add your thoughts to this conversation, I wanted to welcome you guys to do that as well.
Go ahead, Maura, if you want.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Moira with BMAGIC. I'm the Community Outreach and Program Assistant. And I think, I mean, kind of just like what everybody said, is just keeping everybody in San Francisco, and that the affordable housing really isn't that affordable. I mean, I think if you can get in, the BMR program is great, because I have one, but getting in is difficult, and even the income requirements are really high for some people. And then if you make too much, you're stuck. But I mean, just to be able to own a home in San Francisco is virtually impossible. And then if you can get a BMR, or the so-called affordable houses that you can buy, the HOA is kind of ridiculous. Like, it's anywhere from like $300 to over $1,000 on top of your mortgage. So just trying to, I don't know, maybe figure out how you can lower that cost, just so if somebody does qualify to own a home, that they can actually really afford it, because most people can't afford that. And just finding a way to just keep San Francisco back to the way it was before, where anybody could buy a house, but now nobody can. You have to make at least what, like 300 grand annually. And then I just learned that I think 3 to 5% African Americans take up 3 to 5% of San Francisco's population, but they're almost 40% of the homeless population. So finding a way to address that and help keep them in the city, but not as homeless, but to actually have them in housing.
Thank you, Maura. Really good points. Frank, did you want to share?
A little bit. I think I shared with you guys the other day on our call, and I was mostly interested in what Lydia and Hattie had shared, and the perception that a lot of people here have. One of the things I've learned is before people of color were allowed to buy property, there was a huge property grab by certain populations in San Francisco. So when all of that was made available for everybody to buy and purchase houses, it was only in certain neighborhoods and stuff. So I've had this conversation a few times with Aaron and other SF planning, and I know you can't really undo it, but I am really interested in some of these programs that the mayor's office has suggested, such as legacy home ownership, generational wealth building by working with the inheritance tax. And also I think the city, if they're able to leverage their own funds and help families with rent to buy or some kind of program like that, I think that would help, because there was a huge law and policy effort that kind of designed the situation we're in. So I think it calls for just the same reaction to undo and start to heal.
Thank you, Frank. And then we just had somebody just join us, Dina. We're just asking folks to introduce themselves and tell us if they're affiliated with an organization, but also speak to one or two of the prompts, which is what are some of the existing housing programs that serve your housing needs well, and what are some of your housing challenges that may not be served well. So Dina, if you want to unmute yourself and speak to that and introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm representing City of Dreams. I just wanted to sit in on this meeting just to kind of get in the know about what's going on. So I don't have much to say. I'm still fairly new, but I'm excited to learn from you guys and hear what's going on.
Okay, thank you. And then to that point, Zach or Camilla, would the slides be sent to everyone? Somebody asked that in the chat. I think it was Christina.
Yes, of course. Yes,
awesome.
We can send it.
And I also just want to acknowledge Vernon's addition to the chat about learning the correlation between truancy and housing. So just want to make sure that was acknowledged by the planning department's team.
I'm taking note of the chat.
Okay.
Thank you.
And just for myself, I just want to echo some of the points that were brought up. In particular, a few things. One is the point that Ms. Lydia made about SFHDC. SFHDC has a lot of programs, and I think is the main housing service provider, or at least in terms of supporting housing efforts in the Bayview. But I don't know how effective they've been over the years, and so that's be something to look into. Also, just addressing the affordability, but not really being affordable, right? Affordability is relative, right? Especially here in San Francisco. And so while the city may put out a lot of affordable housing programs, who's that really affordable for? It's been my experience, and as you've heard from others on this Zoom, that it's not affordable for the your average working class family or a person. Also, just want to also acknowledge the victim blaming that was brought up, and I think that was by Ms. Hattie, about blaming, especially folks of color, about not putting themselves in position for housing opportunities, when we know that it's not necessarily the case. There's a lot of systemic issues that are in place. And also just wanted to highlight some of the solutions that might be helpful. One is the idea of rent to buy, and assistance with down payments, and it's receiving low interest loans. So just wanted to highlight a few things, those few things from my perspective that were brought up. And then I'll give it back to planning to continue this discussion. And just FYI, we have about maybe 10-15 minutes left before we have to transition.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, we were planning on doing this kind of discussion until 12:50 and then go over some next steps.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Leslie, for that summary. That was great. And thanks to everyone for sharing. I think one of the follow-ups that I wanted to ask about existing programs that serve your constituencies is about homeownership programs and how, I mean, there were some comments about overcrowding and families kind of living, being divided and separate, and clearly there's some gaps there. But I'm also wondering if any of your constituents or clients or your community is going to have access to the homeownership programs that are already out there, or find that type of program useful.
This is Lydia again. To piggyback again off what Lislyn had said about SFHPC and organizations like that, there are organizations who are set up to try to help people get into home ownership, but the housing stock is not available. And the affordability is not available. So it doesn't matter if you have the organizations that are set up, they can help you get on a waiting list, right? Because that's the reality of what's going on in San Francisco and much of the Bay Area. The housing stock is not available for people who are working class or the working poor. Only the rich can afford it. So even if there's an organization whose mission is to help people get into housing, the stock isn't there.
This is Michelle. I want to piggyback on that and add to it that some of the programs, including some of the programs that planning has worked on with HDC for homeownership, I find they're modeled on things that have historically been exploitative and have ushered in ways to purposefully cause Black people and Chinese people specifically to lose their property, such as one of the plans is to qualify people for loans that will extend beyond the life of the person on the mortgage. And then in order for you to keep the house that you supposedly have been paying towards buying, the people who inherit have to then qualify again and start over in order to retain that property, which means your family member invested all that money in all those years only for you to lose it if you don't have it. And I really want to get away from us using the word affordable housing and working class, because affordable housing qualifies people who are middle to upper middle class in this city. I need low income housing for people who are white collar and work for the city, because white collar people who work for the city don't qualify for some affordable housing programs, and we need to be realistic about that as well. Much less the people who actually keep the engine going, who are low income and blue collar, solid middle class. So taking that into account, there's no way to really address any of these issues, even with policy changes that favor us, unless the city is willing to put some deep investment. These programs are going to have to be deeply, deeply subsidized in order to right the wrongs of wealth removal, which were the policies, and de-investment, which were the policies of this city as well as this country for 2 centuries now. And creating programs which mirror those policies, which remove that wealth and remove that investment, are not going to cut it. And that's what, you guys, the city designs those programs. HDC does not. They're stuck implementing what you design. So we need to be realistic about how we're going about doing these things.
Thank you.
And that's it.
Thank you. I see Miss Mary Louise, you were able to unmute yourself. Did you want to add to this conversation?
Oh God, I mean, I thought about this all night about there's so much going on in my head. It was like, okay, you have so much you want to say and how you're going to say it. So I want to associate myself with the remarks of everybody who has talked. The list is too long and beyond the time frame that we have left. So I want to associate myself with remarks of everyone about the decrease in the African American population in the city. Raj Prep had it right on target. The young kids, the school age kids, spend the weekdays in the city and go home on weekends outside of the city. There are, what are some of the other issues? Housing insecurity. Grace Street Youth talked about housing insecurity, homelessness, and grandkids who are living, in the doing couch surfing. What are some of the other things? But I didn't hear about, and Lisa Lynn, I didn't hear about people who are coming out of, I waited for you to say it, people who are coming out of, doing re-entry out of jails and prisons.
Mm-hmm.
And they also, a lot of them end up in Bayview where their grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins. Trust me, I know, I happen to be one of them. The other had to do with Section 8 housing vouchers. How can we, in the era of the current administration, increase those numbers to order to keep the diversity in the city? So the Section 8 housing re-entry, what's happening now with the SROs and the Tenderloin, and I apologize because they're doing tree work outside my house, where I live. Those SROs have been renovated and priced beyond the reach of people who ordinarily would be able to afford them. And then finally, I don't know what about zoning in the Bayview. I have been very, and this ties in with what's going on, what is supposed to be happening with juvenile hall. I don't see, and that's just me, knowing what the zoning issues are in the city. If we're going to redo juvenile hall, where we have alternatives to incarceration, et cetera, the whole issue of services and programs in the city that can accommodate youth who would normally be incarcerated, but would be referred to residential or other service programs. So I hope that the planning commission will add that to it. I don't, someone was going to speak about truancy in housing. I didn't hear that. And then the final thing is, I still would like to hear more about the relationship with truancy in housing. Frank talked about homeownership legacy and generational home ownership. And I like to tell this story. I know we'll never get back to, I'll be very brief, to the point where that we were when I'm originally from New Orleans. I came here as a young kid, but I tell the story about how we came here one family at a time. We were refugees from the South, same as every other refugee that comes from other countries. We were inside the United States, but we came here to work out in the shipyard. And one family would come, establish housing, and then send for the next family. And that was in Bayview. And so we used to call it double rock. So, and then as that family would establish housing, they would move out into other areas of the city. The Fillmore was very prominent at that time. And so I know we can't recapture that history, which I proudly tell, but I do think that someone talked about who was it? I think it was it Michelle? I'm currently going through that, Michelle, about having a mortgage beyond the life of the original owner, and then you have to go back and reapply for the mortgage if you inherit it, and then it be beyond the scope of what you earn, and so then you're faced with either, well, you don't have a choice. You have to sell the home in order to pay off the mortgage. It puts you in this kind of box, which I'm currently going through, having lost my son.
Mary Louise, I don't mean to cut you off, but we have 3 minutes left, and I need to wrap this
So basically, I wanted to associate myself with everything, but I do hope that we will include the 3 things I talked about, expanding the Section 8 voucher and re-entry for whether it's a halfway house or whatever it is for people coming out of jails and prisons.
Okay, thank you. And so Planning Department has put in their contact information in the chat for those who would like to continue to engage with them over this conversation. Christina and others, your question was also answered in the chat around the policy. And there's a link to the housing element website page.
Sorry, can I say something on that point? And also related to the policy question. The housing element is a series of policies and implementation programs. But it's really important for us to hear these thoughts, and kind of these policies can have a strong focus on the issues that are being raised here. And that is what can help drive the legislative and the investment actions that the decision makers make. So even though the housing element itself does not come with a chunk of money or a specific legislative programs, it is the housing plan that will guide the decision makers for making those choices and decisions. So I put a link for a survey that we have. So it would be really helpful for us to get more representation of the feedback that you are sharing here today. The more we hear these comments, the easier it is for us to convince our decision makers to make changes. So it is in the numbers, it is in showing them that there are so many people saying the same thing, and they need to change their course. So it is, the planning department is committed to making these voices, elevate these voices, and making them at the forefront of the housing element. So please, please, please share this link with your community, make your voice heard, make the voice of your community heard, and help us put these solutions, that amazing solutions that you all have and you shared today, in a city legislated document, which is a policy document, but will help our decision makers.
Thank you. Christina, can you just share your email address with the Department of Planning staff, and they can continue the conversation with you about your questions. I do need to end this meeting, you all, because we have to pivot to BMAGIC's convener meeting, which is starting in the next 5 minutes. So hope to see you all that can make it there. If you have registered with us for that meeting, then you will have all the meeting information that you need for that meeting. I want to thank the Planning Department once again for this really engaging conversation. We will share this recording with you. And I believe we might be able to share the chat as well. Frank, is that correct?
Yeah, I could download everything and share it.
All right, so Frank will share the recording with you and the chat, so you guys can have that to complete your notes. All right, y'all? Everyone, take care, be well. Thank you.